We've all heard the stories. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, the mighty gods of Olympus ruling from the heavens with wisdom and power. But what if I told you they weren't gods of justice, but of fear, the dark side of the Greek gods? Were they just cruel tyrants? These weren't benevolent protectors. They were jealous, vengeful, and ruthless. They played with human lives for their own amusement, punished mortals for the smallest offenses, and even turned on each other in brutal displays of power. Think about it. What kind of gods turn a woman into a monster just because she was wronged? Or condemn a man to eternal torment simply for trying to help humanity? The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? These myths aren't tales of inspiration, they're warnings. The Olympians demanded worship, but was it ever about faith? Or was it about control? And here's the real question. If these gods were so powerful, why did they fall? Why did their influence fade while other beliefs took their place? Did humanity finally see through their tyranny, or is there another secret hidden in these myths? The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Stay with me, because today we're exposing the truth behind the so-called gods of Olympus. And trust me, it's worse than you think. Zeus, the king of gods, or ruthless dictator? Zeus, hailed as the almighty ruler of Olympus, wasn't exactly the benevolent father figure some imagine. His rule wasn't built on wisdom and justice, but on sheer, relentless power. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? That's the real question here. Zeus didn't negotiate, he dominated. He overthrew his own father Cronus in a brutal war, imprisoning the Titans in Tartarus, ensuring no one could ever challenge him again. But was he truly a protector of order? Or just another tyrant clinging to his throne? His lightning bolt wasn't just a weapon, it was a warning. Defy him, and you suffer. And suffer they did. Zeus wasn't just the king of gods, he was their judge, jury, and executioner. Look at Prometheus, the titan who dared to help humanity by giving them fire. His reward? Eternal torment. Chained to a rock, his liver was torn out daily by an eagle, Zeus's personal way of saying, know your place. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Zeus didn't stop at punishing rebels. Even mortals who accidentally crossed him faced devastating consequences. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and you could be turned into a beast, a tree, or worse, erased from existence. Yet, for all his might, Zeus was never satisfied. His appetite for power, control, and, let's be honest, women, was insatiable. His countless affairs were not tales of romance, but of manipulation and force. Take Europa, taken against her will, or Leda, tricked into submission, or Callisto, turned into a bear just to cover up Zeus's indiscretions. His actions didn't just ruin lives, they ignited Hera's wrath, unleashing a cycle of endless suffering on innocent mortals. The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? If the so-called king of Olympus couldn't even control his own impulses, was he truly worthy of his throne? Let's not forget the lies. Zeus was a master of deception, a god who bent reality to suit his desires. He took different forms to seduce, deceive, or outright steal what he wanted. A swan, a bull, even golden rain, he would become anything to get his way. And when mortals questioned him, he silenced them. The world under Zeus was not one of peace, but of fear. The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? Was Olympus truly a paradise, or was it just a kingdom ruled by a tyrant too powerful to be overthrown? Even the gods themselves weren't safe. His own brothers and sisters were under constant threat. He overpowered Poseidon and Hades, ensuring they'd never challenge his authority. He humiliated Hera, chaining her in the sky when she defied him. He swallowed Metis, the mother of Athena, to prevent any prophecy of his downfall. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Zeus didn't just rule Olympus, he ruled through fear, keeping even the gods in check with his relentless dominance. But here's the thing, power like that never lasts forever. Despite all his efforts to control fate, cracks formed in his empire. Mortal heroes, once seen as mere playthings, began rising against the gods. Some, like Heracles, defied Zeus's will. Others, like Odysseus, outwitted the gods themselves. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? If Zeus was truly all-powerful, why did he fear mortals enough to intervene in their lives so often? Perhaps even the great Zeus knew his reign, like all tyrannies, had an expiration date. But Zeus wasn't the only one whose cruelty shaped Olympus. If the king of the gods was ruthless, what does that say about his queen? Hera wasn't just a scorned wife, she was a goddess of vengeance, and her wrath spared no one. If Zeus was the tyrant, was Hera the executioner? Hera's wrath, a goddess, fueled by revenge. If Zeus ruled Olympus with an iron fist, Hera wielded her own brand of justice, one that was fueled by vengeance. But here's the thing. Instead of punishing Zeus for his betrayals, she took her wrath out on his victims. The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? Imagine being deceived, used, and then cursed for something beyond your control. That was the fate of countless women who caught Zeus's wandering eye. Take Io, a mortal priestess whom Zeus pursued. To cover his tracks, he transformed her into a cow. But Hera, she wasn't fooled. She sent a gadfly to torment Io endlessly, forcing her to roam the earth in agony. Was this justice, or pure, unrelenting cruelty? And then there was Semele, another unfortunate mortal who caught Zeus's attention. When Hera discovered the affair, she didn't confront her husband. She manipulated Semele into demanding Zeus reveal his true form. Knowing full well that no mortal could survive such divine power, Hera watched as Semele was burned to ashes. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Hera didn't just seek revenge. She ensured that Zeus's lovers met tragic fates, leaving behind scars that lasted generations. But was this the behavior of a goddess of marriage and family, or something far darker? Hera's vengeance extended beyond Zeus's lovers. She took special pleasure in tormenting their children. The greatest example? Hercules. From the moment of his birth, Hera saw him as a stain on her honor. She sent 2 serpents into his crib, hoping to end his life before it even began. When that failed, she made sure his life was nothing but misery, madness, suffering, impossible labors. Hercules' entire existence was shaped by Hera's wrath. The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? If even an innocent newborn wasn't safe from her fury, what did that say about the morality of the gods? But it wasn't just mortals who suffered. Even the gods weren't immune to Hera's jealousy. She plotted against Zeus countless times, leading rebellions, scheming in the shadows, and even attempting to overthrow him. One time, she convinced Poseidon and Athena to help chain Zeus in his sleep, hoping to take control of Olympus. But their plan failed, and Zeus made an example of her, binding her in golden chains, hanging her from the sky, and leaving her to weep in humiliation. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Was Hera simply lashing out from years of mistreatment, or had she become just as merciless as the king she despised? And let's not forget her involvement in one of the most famous tragedies of all time, the Trojan War. Hera's vanity and spite played a crucial role in its destruction. When Paris, a mortal prince, chose Aphrodite as the fairest goddess instead of her, Hera never forgave him. She spent the entire war manipulating events, ensuring Troy burned to the ground, all because of a bruised ego. Thousands died, not because of strategy or fate, but because a goddess couldn't accept losing. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? When divine beings treated human lives like mere pieces on a chessboard, how could they be seen as worthy of worship? Hera's story isn't one of justice. It's one of relentless cruelty disguised as righteousness. She was a goddess who claimed to protect marriage, but was more concerned with punishing those who exposed its flaws. She suffered under Zeus's rule, but became just as ruthless in her own right. And yet, she was far from the only Olympian who saw mortals as nothing more than playthings. If Zeus ruled with fear and Hera with vengeance, then what of Poseidon, the god who took whatever he wanted, no matter the cost? Poseidon, the god who took what he wanted. When people think of Poseidon, they imagine a majestic god ruling the seas. But the truth? He was feared just as much as he was worshipped. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Poseidon wasn't a benevolent ruler, he was a force of nature, unpredictable and vengeful. If a mortal or even another god disrespected him, punishment followed swiftly. Entire cities were swallowed by the sea, sailors were dragged to their watery graves, and kingdoms crumbled under his wrath. Worship wasn't a choice, it was survival. After all, how do you defy a god who can drown your entire civilization with a single wave? But it wasn't just his temper that made him terrifying. It was his insatiable desire to take whatever he pleased. Unlike Zeus, who relied on deception, Poseidon often used brute force. Take Medusa, once a beautiful priestess in Athena's temple. She caught Poseidon's eye, and despite her vows of purity, he pursued her within the sacred walls of the temple. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Medusa was the victim, yet she was the one punished, cursed by Athena and transformed into a monster. Poseidon? He walked away without consequence, his actions yet another example of divine injustice. And then there were the creatures of the deep, beasts that bore his mark. Many of the most horrifying monsters in Greek mythology can be traced back to Poseidon's influence. The Cyclops Polyphemus, who devoured Odysseus's men, a child of Poseidon, the monstrous sea serpent sent to destroy entire fleets, Poseidon's creations. Even the dreaded Minotaur, trapped in the labyrinth, was born from a curse tied to Poseidon's will. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? While mortals prayed for safe passage, Poseidon unleashed horrors that ensured their worst nightmares became reality. Sailors knew better than to anger Poseidon because once you crossed him, your fate was sealed. Just ask Odysseus, who made the mistake of blinding Poseidon's son, Polyphemus. Instead of a quick punishment, Poseidon condemned him to wander the seas for 10 agonizing years, throwing storm after storm in his path. His crime? Trying to survive. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Poseidon didn't just punish. He made examples of those who defied him, proving that even the cleverest mortals were nothing against the will of a god. And his thirst for power didn't stop at the sea. He constantly sought dominion over land, fighting with Athena for control of Athens. When the people chose her wisdom over his strength, he didn't accept defeat gracefully. He flooded the city in rage. Time and time again, Poseidon tried to claim territories, only to leave destruction in his wake when he failed. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Poseidon wasn't just a god of the sea. He was a conqueror, always seeking more, never satisfied, leaving ruin wherever he went. Yet, despite his terrifying power, there was one thing Poseidon could never control: fate. For all his might, he couldn't stop cities from falling, heroes from rising, or even mortals from outsmarting him. His wrath could delay destiny, but it could never rewrite it. And that was the one truth the Olympians never seemed to grasp. They played their games, exerted their power, and ruled through fear. But in the end, even gods could not escape the consequences of their own cruelty. And if Poseidon saw mortals as nothing more than pawns, what does that say about the other gods? Because he wasn't the only one who toyed with human lives. The entire pantheon indulged in their own twisted games, games where mortals suffered and the gods laughed, the cruel games of the Olympians. If the gods were meant to be protectors, they had a strange way of showing it. Instead of guiding humanity, they treated mortals like mere entertainment. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? From the moment of creation, humans were nothing more than playthings for the Olympians. They blessed some, cursed others, and destroyed lives on a whim, often just to prove a point. And worst of all, there was no justice, no fairness. If you caught a god's attention, your fate was no longer your own. It was like living in a world where the rulers made the rules, broke them whenever they pleased, and never faced the consequences. Take Apollo and Artemis, the golden twins of Olympus. They were admired for their beauty, their music, and their hunting skills. But beneath that perfection was a terrifying cruelty. Niobe, a mortal queen, once boasted that she was a better mother than Leto, Apollo, and Artemis's mother. The gods' response? Absolute slaughter. They massacred all of Niobe's children, every last one. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? What kind of gods killed children just because their mother spoke too boldly? It wasn't about justice. It was about making sure mortals knew their place. And then there was the labyrinth, a nightmare carved into the very heart of Crete. A maze designed to trap and kill, filled with horrors that no mortal could escape. The gods allowed King Minos to imprison the Minotaur inside, forcing innocent victims to be thrown into its depths as sacrifices. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? The gods didn't intervene. They didn't stop the suffering. Instead, they watched from Olympus as people were sent to their deaths, all because of a punishment they themselves had set in motion. But perhaps the worst part of it all was that mortals had no real way to fight back. Even when they tried to outwit the gods, their victories were often short-lived. Tantalus, who dared to test the gods' wisdom by serving them human flesh, was condemned to eternal hunger and thirst. Sisyphus, who tried to cheat death, was doomed to push a boulder up a hill forever. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? The gods didn't just punish wrongdoing, they made sure the suffering never ended. Even the Trojan War, one of the most famous conflicts in mythology, wasn't truly about mortals. It was about the gods and their endless rivalries. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite manipulated the war from the shadows, using men as their pawns. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? The war was never about Paris or Helen. It was about proving divine superiority no matter how much blood had to be spilled. And when Troy finally fell, the gods didn't grieve the countless lives lost. They simply moved on to their next game. Yet, for all their power, for all their cruelty, there was one god who stood apart from the rest. A god who ruled not through arrogance, but through silence. Hades, the lord of the underworld. didn't meddle in mortal affairs like his brothers. But does that mean he was truly different? Or was his realm just another prison under divine rule? Hades, the most misunderstood god? Unlike his brothers, Hades didn't rule with storms or earthquakes. He ruled with silence. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? While Zeus struck fear with his thunderbolts and Poseidon with his raging seas, Hades simply watched, waiting for all things to come to him. And they always did. Mortals and gods alike feared him, not because he was cruel, but because he was inevitable. But was he truly the villain mythology made him out to be, or was he simply doing the job no one else wanted? After all, he didn't choose the underworld, it was given to him, and once he descended, there was no escape. Yet, despite his reputation as the god of death, Hades rarely interfered with the living. While the Olympians played their games, he remained in his shadowy realm, enforcing the laws of the dead with a strict but steady hand. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Unlike Zeus, who ruled through fear, Hades ruled through order. He didn't torment souls for fun, he simply ensured that the dead remained where they belonged. But does that make him just, or just another warden of a prison no one could ever leave? Of course, there was one story that forever stained his name, the abduction of Persephone. He saw her, wanted her, and took her. But the tale isn't as simple as it seems. Was Persephone truly a victim? Or was there another side to the story? The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Unlike Zeus or Poseidon, who took without consequence, Hades was forced to negotiate. He struck a deal with Demeter, allowing Persephone to return to the surface for part of the year. It wasn't a perfect compromise, but in a pantheon where gods rarely asked for permission, the fact that he bargained at all made him different. And then there was Tartarus, the pit of eternal torment, a place where the worst souls, those who challenged the gods, were condemned to suffer. But was this truly justice? Or was it simply a way for the Olympians to maintain control? The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Many of those trapped in Tartarus weren't monsters, but rebels. Figures like Prometheus, who had tried to help humanity. Yet, while Zeus delivered the punishment, it was Hades who ensured it was carried out, making him the silent enforcer of Olympus's cruel will. Even among his fellow gods, Hades was treated like an outcast. He wasn't welcome on Olympus, wasn't invited to their feasts, and was spoken of in whispers, as if saying his name too loudly might bring death itself. But was it because he was truly feared, or because he was the only god who didn't indulge in their power-hungry games? The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? If anything, Hades seemed more indifferent than malevolent. A god who followed the rules instead of breaking them, a ruler who didn't seek more than what was already his. But in the end, was his rule any better than that of Zeus or Poseidon? The underworld wasn't a place of comfort, it was a place of no return. Souls had no choice but to stay, trapped in an eternal cycle dictated by divine law. The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? If the gods were truly just, why was death such a prison? And more importantly, why did the mortals continue to worship those who saw them as nothing more than dust in the wind? Because eventually, all gods fall. And when they do, the question remains, were they ever worthy of devotion in the first place? Were the gods even worth worshipping? The Greeks built temples, held grand festivals, and sacrificed animals, all to appease their gods. But was it ever about faith, or was it just fear? The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? When you look at their myths, you start to see a pattern. Worship wasn't about love or devotion, it was about survival. You prayed to Zeus, not because you admired him, but because you didn't want to be struck by lightning. You made offerings to Poseidon, not out of gratitude, but so your ship wouldn't be swallowed by the sea. The gods didn't ask for worship, they demanded it. And those who refused? They were punished, erased, or turned into cautionary tales. Yet, despite their power, the Olympians weren't invincible. Their influence faded, their temples crumbled, and their names became nothing more than stories. But why? If they were so powerful, why did humanity stop worshipping them? The dark side of the Greek gods. Were they just cruel tyrants? Maybe people realized that the gods weren't protectors, they were oppressors. And when new ideas, new beliefs, and new gods emerged, the Olympians were left behind, abandoned just as they had abandoned so many of their followers. But here's a chilling thought. What if they never truly left? Some believe the gods still watch from the shadows, lingering in forgotten places, waiting for their chance to reclaim what was once theirs. After all, myths never really die, they evolve. The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? What if the Olympians didn't disappear, but simply changed form? What if their influence is still woven into our world, hidden in ways we fail to recognize? Could their thirst for power, their manipulation, and their hunger for devotion still shape the world today? And if they were to return, would they rule any differently? Have humans changed enough to resist them, or would we fall back into the same patterns, offering sacrifices, building temples, bowing before them once more? The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? If history has taught us anything, it's that power, once given, is never easily taken back. And if the Olympians ever rise again, will we recognize them before it's too late? So, what do you think? Were the Greek gods truly divine, or were they just powerful tyrants ruling through fear? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you love exploring the dark truths of mythology, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? So, after everything we've uncovered, do you still see the Olympians as gods of wisdom and justice? Or were they nothing more than tyrants with absolute power? The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? They ruled through fear, demanded obedience, and crushed anyone who dared to challenge them. But here's the real question. If these myths were passed down for generations, what were they trying to teach us? Were they warnings about the dangers of unchecked power? Or is there something even deeper hiding beneath these stories? And if the gods were so cruel, why did people worship them for so long? Did they truly believe in their divinity, or were they simply afraid of the consequences of defiance? The dark side of the Greek gods, were they just cruel tyrants? And more importantly, are we still repeating history today? Are there still figures of power, still systems of control that demand devotion in the same way the Olympians did? Maybe the gods never truly left. Maybe they just changed their names. Now, I want to hear from you. Were the Greek gods ever worthy of worship, or were they just cosmic bullies ruling through fear? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you love diving into the dark side of mythology, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We've only scratched the surface, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.